Tū matatia tūramatia, te tuapapa o te matatu Aotearoa, ki runga ki raro ki uta ki tai. Koia ko te manakitanga, te whanaungatanga, te pono me te whakamana i te ako. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. E te ti, e te tā, e ngā iwi katoa. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai ki tēnei piringa rauhuia, ki tēnei hui huinga kōrero whakatau mai rā ki tēnei tere terenga rauhuia. Ko Kim Bonington toku ingoa, ko au tētahi o ngā tohutohu mātua mo te mātatu Aotearoa. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Kim Bonington, and I am one of the senior advisors here at the Teaching Council. In a paper for Rauhuia Leadership Space, Dr. Camilla Highfield noted the following, that the development of leadership knowledge, practices and dispositions of middle leaders needs to occur in a setting where professional learning is valued. Formalized professional learning, coaching, mentoring and support should be available for those aspiring to leadership at every level. Time and resources must be prioritised to ensure teachers have a clear pathway for their development to grow leadership capability and capacity. Professional development strategies for middle leaders need to be well resourced and connected to learn from colleagues in their own context. And in that piece, she was quoting research from the OECD in 2014. Today, we are going to discuss the many forms and benefits of mentoring and coaching before we start looking at a contextualized approach to the theory. We are pleased to have you here and part of this discussion. No mai kia piri, no mai kia tata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to Dr. Kate Thornton. Kate is an associate professor in the School of Education at Te Herenga Waka Victoria University of Wellington. Her research areas include mentoring and coaching, educational leadership, and professional learning communities. She is a former secondary school teacher, play centre parent, and professional development facilitator. She is currently program director of the Master of Secondary School Leadership program and teaches in the Master of Education program. She has recently been involved in designing and facilitating 2 micro-credential courses for secondary school teachers, effective mentoring practices, and working collaboratively in building leadership capability. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Kim. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. It's lovely to be here and be talking to you today on the topic of sustaining change through coaching, mentoring and collaboration. So from Kim's introduction, you would have picked up I've had a variety of roles in the education sector. I've been in tertiary education for over 25 years. However, I still have contacts with other parts of the education sector through my whānau. One of my daughters is a middle leader in a secondary school. I have 4 grandchildren at primary school and 2 grandchildren at play centre. So still have lots of contact with those working on the coalface, so to speak. So we're going to start with whakatauki, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. Mā te huruhuru ka reri te manu. With feathers, a bird will take flight. And this whakatauki, I think, is particularly appropriate as it's one that was shared at the launch of Rauhuia a number of years ago, but it also fits beautifully with the idea of the purpose and the function and practice of mentoring, because mentoring enables people to gather the strength through support from others to take those next steps, to take flight, to do things they couldn't do on their own. So I'm going to start with getting you to think about these statements, because what we're going to do is get you to, I guess, reflect on your current thinking around mentoring and coaching. And then I'm going to unpack these as we go through my presentation and revisit them at the end. So the first one, I'll just explain them briefly and then I'll give you a minute or two to have a think. So the first statement says that mentoring is for the benefit of the mentee. So the purpose of mentoring is to support people who are learning and growing, are new to a particular role, whether that be a teaching role, a leadership role, or other roles. So think about how you feel about that, or I guess another way of thinking about that is mentoring is for more than just the mentee. The second one is looking at mentoring and coaching. So you might believe that mentoring and coaching are interchangeable terms, or you might actually think they're quite different. Just have a think about your current thinking on that. The third statement says that context matters in mentoring. So again, you may have an opinion whether you think context matters or that a good mentor can mentor in any context, and it doesn't actually matter. We'll unpack that a bit too. The fourth statement suggests that great teachers will make great mentors. And so what that suggests is that the same sort of skill set, the same capabilities apply to teaching as they do to mentoring. So is that something you agree with or disagree with? And the final one is that asking questions is just as important as giving advice in a mentoring relationship. So 5 statements there. I'm going to give you a minute or so just to have a think about and perhaps think, yep, true, false, maybe, and then we're going to explore each of them and then come back to them at the end of the presentation. So a bit of reflection time. Okay, so hopefully you've either made a mental note or perhaps jotted down your current thinking. And then as I talk and explain some of these ideas, you may have some of your notions reinforced and there might be others that you feel differently about. So I want to start with sort of looking at that big picture in terms of the importance of mentoring in educational contexts. Recently, I did a literature review for a journal article which explored the importance of preparation for mentoring. And what a lot of the research says, both local and international, is that all teachers, no matter what stage of their career, can benefit from mentoring, and that's both personally and professionally. And I think that links with Kim's introduction. But also, to quote O'Rourke, there's an immense richness of learning to be found in teachers leading each other in learning. So no one person has all the answers, but a community of learners will empower everyone to find ideas worth exploring. So what that suggests is that mentoring is about supporting people and having them being part of a learning community rather than just individual relationships. So just thinking about that term mentoring and what it actually means, and I'm going to explore a couple of different definitions. The first one is probably a more traditional one from Christopher Day, who describes it as a form of support provided by a more experienced to a less experienced person that enables the less experienced person to identify, understand, and examine their roles, whatever they may be, and what qualities and competencies they need in order to fulfill them successfully in their contexts. So that's fairly traditional. It's someone more experienced working with someone less experienced and actually helping them achieve what they need to do in their roles. Alice's and colleagues' definition is a little bit different. It's a bit more holistic, and I like this one because it also describes mentoring as a reciprocal relationship where both mentor and mentee benefit and learn. So I think both are useful in helping us think about what mentoring looks like, but they're both slightly different in their emphasis on what mentoring looks like and the importance of different aspects. There is a common framework that we often refer to, and that is drawn on in the Teaching Council's guidelines, which is educative mentoring. And this particular way of thinking about mentoring was first thought of or first written about by Sharon Feynman-Nemser in 2001 when she introduced the term educative mentoring. And it emphasizes mentoring as a collaborative process involving reciprocal learning and joint construction of knowledge. And this moves away from what was the more traditional way of thinking about mentoring, which was more like an apprenticeship relationship, where someone with expertise and knowledge shared that expertise and knowledge with someone more junior, less experienced. And it was quite a hierarchical, top-down relationship. Whereas the idea of educative mentoring is that it's a mutual learning, reciprocal process that benefits both parties. And as Ewing says, educative mentoring involves the mentee as an active partner in the process. So rather than just being given knowledge, they can drive the relationship, they can be sharing their own learning, and they're not just a passive recipient. So I think that's an important framing to think about when we think about how mentoring benefits the wider community. So we've unpacked one of the statements that I started with, and now we're going to look at the second one, which is the differences and similarities between mentoring and coaching. Now, there's a lot of debate about these, and I'm just giving you a bit of an overview of what's commonly talked about in the literature regarding the differences and the similarities. So generally people see mentoring as a longer-term relationship, more holistic, taking a broader view, whereas coaching can be of quite short duration. You can have, for example, a coaching conversation with someone, and you're not mentoring them, but you're working with them to grow their skills and knowledge. So the focus of mentoring is mostly on career, but also personal development, because it is that longer term holistic relationship, whereas coaching may focus on more specific issues. In mentoring, and that's taking the educative view of mentoring, the agenda set by the mentee, whereas in coaching, it depends on the situation and it may be focused on particular knowledge and skills. So mentors draw on their knowledge and experience. So generally a mentor has some expertise, some experience in whatever it is the mentee is learning about. Whereas in coaching, it might be more around the coaching skills. Mentors can draw on coaching skills in their work. However, coaches won't necessarily be mentors. And mentoring will usually involve both formal and informal interactions. So there might be certain meeting times, but there'll also be those just casual conversations, which can be just as valuable, whereas coaching may involve specific and scheduled interactions. So that's teasing out some of the differences, but you can see there's similarities as well. They're both relationships which help people learn and grow. And as you'll see as I go through some of the other slides, sometimes coaching is seen as a subset of mentoring. So that may or may not help you with the second statement I got you to think about. But as we move on, it might become clearer. So the third statement was around the importance of context. And in this part of the presentation, I'm going to draw on the mentoring guidelines for new researchers that were developed by Te Aparangi, the Royal Society of New Zealand, because I really like their framing and I think it's a really good fit with the Aotearoa New Zealand context. So they say that mentoring involves ako, or co-learning through the exchange of professional beliefs, knowledge, experience, and wisdom between the tuakana or mentor and the tainer or mentee, so as to assist and promote the becoming, being, and belonging of both parties. And I think that's a very rich description of what mentoring or mentorship is at its best. And they also remind us that mentoring must take into consideration the interplay and connectedness of diverse identities, cultures, gender, class, learning, and power. So context is really important, and being aware of what your mentee brings with them, or what you as a mentee, if you're in that position, bring to a relationship is really important. As well as the explanations, the guidelines also highlight the importance of certain values, and the three Māori values that are referred to in the guidelines are manaakitanga, which is cherishing and enhancing the mana of others, which you can understand is really important in a mentoring relationship. Whanaungatanga, acknowledging and building relationships, and kotahitanga, that is a shared understanding and the purpose or the vision for the mentoring arrangement. So some really useful guidance there of what, I guess, underpins an effective mentoring relationship. So just to summarize, I think, the importance of the context and what mentoring does look like, I think it's important to focus on the reciprocal nature of mentoring, with the mentor positioning themselves as a learner alongside the mentee. So we've moved away from that apprenticeship model, and we're hopefully more using the concept of ako and seeing that both parties are learners. And remembering that while a mentee may be a less experienced teacher or a less experienced leader, they bring other knowledge from their life experiences, and that is very valuable and should be cherished in the mentoring relationship. And another important thing about mentors is that mentoring gives mentors the capacity or the opportunity to pass on what's been shared with them, which is the concept of paying forward. Through mentoring others, you can become a better teacher, mentor, coach, or leader. So, what does an effective mentoring relationship look like? As I go through these, I'd like you to think about your own experiences, either as a mentee or a mentor, or both, if you've had both experiences, and think about which of these you've experienced and perhaps which is important, because I think they're all things that we need to consider when thinking about mentoring relationships. So the first thing, and I think it's probably the absolute key for any relationship, is that there is that trust. So when you've got trust, people can be themselves. They can be more honest, they can be more open, and they have the potential to grow. Without the trust, you won't get that happening, and therefore you won't get the growth and the progress that you want to see. It's also important for both parties to have clear boundaries and goals around the relationship. And it's important to discuss these at the beginning of the relationship, so both parties are clear about what the expectations are, what the goals are, and it's a bit of a safety thing for both parties too, to know what is okay to talk about and what's outside the relationship. It needs to be collaborative, and we've already talked about the importance of collaboration and reciprocity, so it's not a one-way relationship. I touched on in terms of thinking of the statements at the beginning about the importance of questioning. And so I would say that a mentor who can ask useful questions is an absolute necessity for an effective mentoring relationship. As is having a strength-based approach. So rather than focusing on what people can't do, start by focusing what they can do and then think about how to transfer that to other aspects of their work. I think it's also really important that the mentor is a really good active listener and demonstrates empathy so that the mentee can come along with their struggles and with things that they're finding challenging in their work and know that there's someone friendly and sympathetic and empathetic who will listen to them and understand where they're coming from. And that, I think, links to the next point, is that there needs to be an openness to different perspectives. Just because someone has different ways of, or different challenges, different ways of thinking, doesn't mean there's a right way and a wrong way. So being inclusive and open to those differences, being open-minded and being flexible is important. The next two sort of go together, that in a mentoring relationship, there needs to be challenge as well as support, and that will provide opportunities for critical thinking. And that links back to the idea of that questioning. So if people are asked good open questions, then they're more likely to be thinking and reflecting and coming up with their own solutions to challenges or issues they might have in their practice, rather than just being fed answers and being told what to do, which isn't that helpful in the long term. It might seem helpful at the time, but in terms of building self-efficacy, then long term it isn't so helpful. And probably going around to similar to the trusting relationship, that sense of manaakitanga. So people's mana should be built through every interaction, whether they're challenging conversations or not. That's always sitting behind that value. So I'll just give you another 30 seconds or so just to, again, reflect on your relationships and how they connect to each of those and what you might want to focus on in the future. Okay, in the next part of the presentation, I'm going to introduce you to a few different frameworks and models that could be helpful in understanding parts of the mentoring relationship. So this first model explains that mentoring relationships go through a number of stages. And these stages are not necessarily distinct, they overlap, but it can be actually useful to focus on each of them in terms of making sure that the key ideas in each stage are addressed. So the first stage relates back to that idea of building trust that we talked about earlier. So the idea is that at the beginning of the relationship, you need to build that trust and you need to get to know that whole person. So what they bring with them, what experiences they have that you can draw on. And that does continually need to be worked on throughout, but the beginning part of the relationship is really important because without that, you won't make progress through the other stages. The second stage here is the assessing or direction setting or deciding on the outcomes of the relationship. So what do we want to achieve by this mentoring relationship and what are our expectations? And that again needs to be revisited, particularly if it's a longer term relationship, like the relationship with a PCT where it goes on for up to 2 years, then it's important to keep checking in because that relationship will evolve and what worked at the beginning of the relationship may not work partway through. So that flexibility is important. And then there's the progress making. So the coaching here is seen as one part of the mentoring process, where the mentor will draw on those approaches and strategies such as listening, questioning, giving feedback and goal setting that will help the mentee grow and progress and meet their own goals. And that's probably the stage that you're most familiar with. You think, yes, this is what you do. You have those conversations, but it will work better if you pay attention, first of all, to the rapport building, secondly, to the expectations and the purpose, and then get on with the doing part of the relationship. And then finally, the guiding and moving on. And I think from my experience talking to a lot of people about mentoring practice, this is sometimes ignored. So it's that lovely time to sort of take stock, to celebrate, to think about what's been achieved in the relationship and to celebrate success, and then to decide what's going to happen to the relationship. And this is particularly at the end of formal relationships, like perhaps the 2-year relationship that I just mentioned, working with a PCT. So how's the relationship going to change? You might just, occasionally catch up over coffee, so it might look like that, but actually acknowledging and celebrating what has been achieved, I think, is important. Another model that I've found very useful, and this is something that I was introduced to when I visited California back in 2012 as part of a Fulbright scholarship to study mentoring at the New Teacher Centre. And the mentors there were very well trained and had a lot of professional learning opportunities. And this was a model that they used and focused on a lot. And it says that there are 3 different ways that you can work with your mentee. You can use an instructive approach, and that's when you're sharing information. And it's when you've got control as the mentor, because you are basically directing what's happening in the interactions. And that's how I think a lot of relationships start. The mentor, who's more experienced, has knowledge to share. However, if that's all that happens, then there's not going to be much growth by the mentee. The second approach is that ARCL, the mutual learning. It's the collaborative phase, which involves co-construction. And so it's about the mentee and mentor working together, having those conversations, perhaps working on a problem together or discussing issues and so on. And then we have the facilitative stage, and that's probably the one that people feel less confident in, because it's actually handing over the control to the mentee, and the mentor's role is just to ask really good questions to encourage reflection, and that's what leads to the development of self-efficacy. So that's, I think, a good model to think about if it's something new to you, to think about what times am I in each of these phases, and am I using them all? Or if you're a mentee, is your mentor using them all to encourage that growth? So really just to summarize, I think some of the key things that should be present in a mentoring relationship. The mentor should be skilled in building and maintaining the relationship throughout. They should be using active listening, and that's not easy. It's not something that I think we are taught. It's something we have to learn to do. To be able to ask effective questions, and that means open questions that cause the mentee to reflect and think about ways in which they can solve their own challenges and problems. Goal setting, and I know Michela's going to talk a little bit about that in her presentation. Giving and receiving feedback, and problem solving. And here I'd like to suggest that these mentoring capabilities are actually somewhat different from the capabilities that teachers use in the classroom. Some of them are similar, but actually there's a slightly different emphasis. So there's a real emphasis on listening and asking questions to which you don't know the answer, not questions you do know the answer to. So maybe just think about that emphasis and the difference between what you would do as a teacher and what you would do as a mentor. So for the last few minutes, I want to just discuss some research I've done recently one thing I mentioned earlier was the review of literature, which was really useful for thinking about best preparation for mentors. And then, as Kim mentioned in the introduction, I've been involved in developing micro-credentials. And the first micro-credential that we developed at Te Herenga Waka, which was in conjunction with the PPTA, but funded by the Ministry of Education, was one called Effective Mentoring and Coaching for secondary school teachers. And last year, I did a research study on how participation in that training program had influenced mentoring practice, and I'll share that with you. And then finally, I also did a case study exploring the embedding of a culture of mentoring in a school. So I'm just going to touch on those and just the implications, I think, for mentoring practice. So first of all, this is some data from the study I did about the impact of participating in the micro-credential. So this was taken from a survey of, I think, 78 teachers who answered the survey about what difference participation made. So as you'll see there's some pretty high percentages in terms of the impact and influence of the training. 95% felt they'd developed a greater awareness of the stages and approaches that I've shared with you recently and which were part of the micro-credential. 82% felt that their relationship was more reciprocal than it had prior to their participation. In terms of the practices, which we worked on in a full-day workshop day, which allowed opportunities to learn about and put into practice active listening, questioning, goal setting, and having challenging conversations, you can see the percentages there, in particular the 98% feeling more confident about having challenging conversations. And overall, 93% of participants were more confident in their mentoring role. So I think what that shows is that mentoring preparation programs make a difference. And it's important for people to actually think about their mentoring and not just assume that because you're a good teacher, you're going to make a good mentor, because you can learn more. From looking at the program that we did develop as part of the micro-credential, and this data is mainly from interviews I did with some of the participants. Effective training programs are usefully informed by participant perspectives. So one of the strengths of the program is that we met with teachers first to find out what they actually wanted from a training program. So that's something that can be recommended. Important to have a balance of theory and practice. So it's all very well to practice, but having the frameworks like educative mentoring to work on as a foundation and a framework to understand what sits behind the practices is very useful. And that is something that came through in the micro-credential. That in the training program, different cultural perspectives are drawn on. So we had expertise from both Māori and Pacific teachers and leaders who shared those perspectives, and I think that was quite illuminating for a number of the participants who perhaps hadn't heard those perspectives before. And the interactions, both at the workshop day and in the webinars that we had as part of the micro-credential, encouraged collaboration and mutual learning. So you learn a lot by talking to other mentors about their practice and reflecting with them. And what was particularly pleasing for me was to hear about this transfer of skills and knowledge to other situations and interactions that these mentors had in their workplaces. So to summarize sort of what I took away from that, and to also draw on the case study that I did, and I have permission to share the school I worked with in this case study, which was Mission Heights Junior College, that when you are introducing mentoring to a school, which was the case at Mission Heights, which has mentoring for all teachers rather than just beginning teachers or leaders in most schools. Consider the purpose for mentoring and the values that underpin it. And we've done that today through thinking about frameworks such as educative mentoring, which provide that clear structure and common understanding. Because if different people in the school have different approaches, then it means there can be a lack of clarity. Carefully select mentoring pairs and, where possible, include an element of choice. And this can be tricky to do, but there is quite a few studies showing that where there is some degree of choice, then that trust builds more quickly and the relationships go well. Also prepare and support the mentors, as I've just been talking about, and make sure the scheduled times for mentoring are preserved, not letting them be overtaken by other events in early childhood services or schools, and assure alignment with the professional growth cycle so that the mentoring isn't an add-on, it actually seamlessly fits with all of the other professional learning that occurs. So these tips, I guess, are things for you to think about in your context, whether you have mentoring for everybody or just mentoring in specific areas. I think this can be some useful guidance. And before we go back to our statements, I wanted to share this quote from one of the DPs at Mission Heights, because I think it really nicely encapsulates the potential of mentoring. I think that by investing in mentoring at a school, you're investing in your people. There are so many positive spin-offs to the sacrifice of 1 hour, 2 times a term, or maybe even more frequently than they've ever dreamed of. If schools want to invest in strong relationships, if they want to help staff grow and upskill and value the expertise and knowledge of long-serving members, but also value the voice and capacity of new staff members, mentoring is a model to embrace. So that was from advice I asked from other schools, for other schools, I should say, thinking of embedding mentoring practice. Okay, so just to finish off, we're going to revisit those statements. So if you've got that mental picture of what your responses were, or if you've made some notes there, I'll quickly summarize what I've talked about, and you may or may not have changed your mind once you've heard what I've been sharing. So mentoring is for the benefit of the mentee, but not just the mentee. Mentoring can benefit the mentor, but it also can benefit the wider service or school, because strong mentoring relationships provide professional growth and give teachers, I guess, confidence, and if we go back to our whakatauki, those feathers in order to fly. Mentoring and coaching are similar, but not quite the same. Mentoring more holistic, coaching perhaps more targeted, but good mentors use coaching strategies in their practice. Context does really matter in mentoring. It will look different in different contexts, and it will look different depending on who's in that mentoring relationship. Great teachers won't necessarily make great mentors. Mentors need preparation. They need to unlearn some things they perhaps do in their teaching practice and learn other things. So it's worth investing in that. And asking questions is as important as giving advice, and I would say probably even more important than giving advice. It's a real skill that you need to have. So hopefully there's been some food for thought in my presentation, and I think Kim's going to take over now. Ngā mihi nui.
Kia ora, Kate. Thank you so much for your presentation. I love the way that you invited us to think about your statements and whether or not they were true or false. Took us through your presentation, linking back and then taking us through those questions again to challenge us as to whether or not our thoughts had changed. Really great to hear what mentoring and coaching is and isn't. Also, the different approaches that we can take. I was at an ECE conference in Auckland on the weekend, and I ran a couple of presentations about professional growth cycles for ECE teachers at that conference. And it was great to hear from one service how they were using mentoring as part of their professional growth cycle. So it's also awesome to hear that context come in for our ECE teachers and leaders. I also know that with the development of the new curriculum and in particular the work that is being done on structured literacy and structured numeracy, a number of primary schools are using mentoring and coaching to help embed those practices within their schools. And so I know that the approaches that you have presented today and the advice that you've given, as well as hearing back into the research that you've been doing yourself in the last couple of years, has been really helpful. So kia ora, Kate. Thanks again. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Roseanne to introduce our next presenter. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Roseanne London tōku ingoa, ko Aotearoa o ngā tohu mātua mō te matatu Aotearoa. My name is Roseanne London, and I, like Kim, am a Senior Advisor in the Relationship and Pathways team at the Teaching Council. It is my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, a highly respected and experienced leader in early childhood education, with over 20 years of service across Aotearoa, New Zealand and the UK. She has contributed to the sector in a wide range of roles, including kaiako, centre manager, learning and development facilitator, and regional manager across diverse settings such as Montessori environments, play centres, and education and care centres. Currently, she serves as the Deputy Principal at Rauhuia Montessori Preschool and is a board member for Montessori Aotearoa, New Zealand. She holds a Bachelor of Education in Early Childhood, an AMI Montessori Diploma, and a Certificate in Leadership. In this session, she will share her personal and professional journey in coaching and mentoring, drawing from her experiences both as a centre leader and as a support manager leading from afar. She will offer insights, challenges, and key learnings that have shaped her practice, with the hope of inspiring others to reflect on and enrich their own coaching and mentoring journeys. And I'll add here that I have seen the presentation, and what she will share is relevant, not just for ECE, but the whole education sector. And on a personal note, I have had the privilege of being mentored by her myself, and I can truly say that her wisdom, generosity, and grounded approach have had a lasting impact on my own professional journey. Please join me in welcoming Michela Homer.
Kia ora. Thank you, Roseanne. Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Michalisburg te maanga, ko Val te awa, ko Cathay Pacific te waka rererangi. No Awerika ki te tonga ahau, kei te noho au whanganui atara. Ko Guido toku mātua, ko Audrey toku whaia, ko Michael toku tāne, ko Luke me Georgina toku tamariki. Kei Waiora Montessori aha e mahi ana. Ko Michela toku ingoa. It's absolutely incredible to be talking to all of you today. I really appreciate being in front of you and being able to share my journey, especially after talking and listening to Kate. I am a mother to two adult children and a wife to Michael for over 28 years now. As Roseanne has said, I've worked in ECE for over 30 years in a variety of roles, both here and in the UK. I speak to you today just from my experience, not as an expert, so I hope that I have something of value to offer you all. I'd like to start by asking you to take a moment to reflect back. I really want you to think about an individual in the past that has made a significant impact on you as a teacher, and why? What did they actually do that supported you to grow in your teaching and learning? Hopefully, everyone has somebody that they can reflect back on. So I'm just going to give you a moment just to have a really good think about that. Okay. Hopefully everyone's thought of someone. If you haven't, I hope by the end of this presentation that you can be that someone, or that someone comes to light for you. Here's the thing, as Kate has said, we know mentoring and coaching is so important, but there's a big but. In day-to-day world, we know it is so incredibly time-consuming. And in our sector, in education, we are so time poor. We also know it has to be planned, and the best plans get derailed really quickly when we have staff away, or when we have a teacher shortage, or just when an incident happens and we have to drop everything. There's also people that you may come across that struggle to open up and discuss their aspirations or their goals for teaching. And sometimes you feel like you're kind of going round and round in circles and struggling to get to be of any use to these people. Also, we're often in a space where we are focusing on the urgent, the things that have to happen every day, your compliance checks, your assessment for children, your emails that you have to answer, all of these things that are transactional that have to happen every day. And sometimes that can derail us from remembering the importance of thinking strategically or long term, particularly around transformational changes. So what we know is that it's a massive investment in time, but it's critical if we want to be the best we can be for our learners. So hopefully I've convinced you that it is worth the time, but let's talk about it a little bit more. As Kate mentioned, these three things underpin mentoring and coaching completely. As an early centre manager, I really relied on using the strategies I'd seen from my first manager when I arrived to New Zealand. She was the one who actually brought me back to teaching, and to this day, I credit her for me remaining in the profession. When I think about what it was that she did that enticed me back into the profession, there's a few things that really stand out for me. One was that she really valued me as an individual. I really felt as a new beginning teacher in New Zealand, I felt seen, I felt heard, and I felt like I had something to offer. She recognized in me my whole self, that I brought my whole self to work every day. I really felt that she cared about me as a human. She started this by instantly showing interest in who I was and finding out about my whānau and finding out about where I'd come from, the knowledge I brought with me into the space. I had come from a predominantly Montessori or sole Montessori background in the United Kingdom. So I knew nothing about Te Whāriki. I knew nothing about New Zealand at all. So I felt very lost when I first arrived here. But she took the time to understand where I'd come from and really wanted to bring me on a journey with her. Looking back, I really recognize now that she very much used a te whare tapewha model. And I don't even know if she intentionally thought about that. But when I think about all of those parts of who of how she got to know me, I definitely recognize that that is how she got to know me and how she was able to build that trust and that openness and that willingness to expose, I guess, where I wanted to learn and grow and my vulnerabilities as a new teacher in New Zealand. So she gave me that sense of belonging, that sense of security to be able to start to ask lots of questions, to start to explore new ideas, and to start to take the things that I knew and bring them into a new context. I would never, ever have been able to do that without these values that underpin the relationship that we had. She also did something else, and that was she saw the potential in me that I hadn't even considered or thought about. So, for those of you that moved to New Zealand, you might come with an early childhood qualification that may not be recognized here, which is exactly what happened to me. And I never thought about training or getting my qualification to be a registered teacher in New Zealand. But under her guidance and under her support, she was very quick to give me the confidence to reach for those stars. So she would, talk to me about the value of getting my qualification. She would talk to me about the value or the potential she saw for my next step as a teacher. And all of those built a level of excitement in me and enabled me to really try and achieve those things. So when I, in turn, became a centre manager, I was really focused on listening to my team. I really wanted to take what I really wanted to draw on what I'd learned from her and bring that to life in my own role as a teacher and as a centre leader. What I wasn't sure about doing was how I could take this knowledge and how I could become this collaborative and this person who brought this team together, but how I could actually focus on growing individual teachers. So I think I was at that stage really relational. I was collaborative. I had all of these plans, all of these ideas in place, and I had a team that I felt that was working well together. But I never targeted or really focused on where they wanted to grow. And then I had an opportunity to move into a different role. And that was a role where I had oversight over 7 centres. So I went from a tiny little 30 licensed Montessori centre to suddenly being in a role where I was responsible for supporting curriculum development, ensuring compliance is being met, and supporting, in those days, PRTs. And the image that I want to show you is a little bit how I felt when I would arrive at a centre initially. So I felt like I would get in my little green Mazda, would drive up to the centre, people would see me and they would scarper. They would disappear. And it was really tricky. It was really tricky to go into a centre with all these great ideas, this wonderful thinking that I was going to make a difference, and people disappearing. So it really caused me to stop and really think about who I was and what I could be doing differently. And I first started thinking about the challenges. So the challenges were, how do I build credibility with these centres and these individuals in these centres when I was someone that was coming in and out the centres? I had come from a small licensed centre. They didn't know me. They didn't know what I had to offer. And they probably felt a sense of, well, who is this person that's driving up and telling me what to do? I also had to find a balance between valuing and understanding the individuals in the centre for who they were versus what our organisational goals and directions were. So I had to start to really figure out, how do I get to know what makes this place who they are, what makes this teacher who that individual is, and how do I bring them along on this journey that our organisation is on. Alongside that, I also had to really balance my own pedagogical values, my own pedagogical thinking with the individual in front of me. So just because I thought a certain way, just because I believed a certain thing, didn't make it right. And when I was sitting with a centre manager, or when I was sitting with a provisionally registered teacher, I had to think really carefully around our conversations around not necessarily trying to get to who was right, but what are our differences? How do we share learning? And how do we get to a place where there's new learning happening? And then, like I mentioned earlier, I had to really think about where a centre was placed in terms of were they just literally surviving? Were they in survival mode? Was it or were they in a space where they were able to invest the time to really talk about the bigger things? So were they just in the urgent stage of their thinking, or were they ready to grow and develop? So I had a lot going on in those early days trying to figure it all out, but I was really lucky in those days because it was when the language of emotional intelligence started to really become well known within education. So I was really lucky enough to find some online learning through this course of Leading with Emotional Intelligence. And it was through Case Western University. I'm not sure if they still offer it, but if they do, I really encourage people to have a look at it. So at the time, it was really new to New Zealand. It wasn't really well known within education circles. But I feel I'm not going to go into a lot of emotional intelligence now because I feel like it's something that is a lot more known about. And if it isn't something you know, again, I encourage you to spend some time and having a look. But there's some key things in emotional intelligence that I think sit really nicely or really closely aligned to mentoring and coaching. And the first one is self-awareness. I cannot stress how important it is in terms of being effective at supporting others to grow. If you are not self-aware about about how you react to things, how you feel about things, how you are in your own emotional state, it's really, really hard to actively listen to other people. So you can only change what's happening in your own mind if you're aware of it. So making sure that you know what those triggers are will help you to be able to kind of manage that. So for example, you can benefit from learning who you are and how your buttons are pushed by different things. Furthermore, emotional self-awareness helps you to recognize situations when emotions like fear, frustration, and anger start to control you. So these emotions are obviously negative for your happiness. In terms of coaching, this means I can't have a session with someone if I'm feeling all of these big emotions. I have to prepare myself fully to be able to be fully present and give that person, that individual, the focus and attention that they deserve. So a lot of it is mental preparation for myself. So I make sure that I look after my own mental and physical health by making sure that I always schedule time to do the things that are important for me. It's the only way that I can make sure that when I am at work, that I'm able to be fully there for others. So it's things like thinking about what you're enjoying. So if you enjoy, I don't know, for me, it's reading every night. I make sure that I do that. Another way that I ensure that I take care of my own self is by having those trusted peers or those trusted, again, mentors that I can talk to. I think that that's really important to have someone that I can share some of the things that I'm working on, some of the things that perhaps I'm finding challenging, so that I can work through that as well. Another part of emotional intelligence that you'll hear often spoken about is self-regulation, or being able to manage your emotions. So once you're self-aware of how you respond to certain triggers, you're able to intentionally take action when that happens in the moment. And this would avoid so many issues if all of us could use self-regulation when dealing with tricky situations. So again, in terms of mentoring and coaching, this may mean you have an individual that you're meeting with that you know may not come prepared, or they may come in and have want to use that meeting rather than a basis for their own growth as an opportunity to complain about their peers or a child. So again, it's thinking about, you know, if you're thinking about that person and you're starting to feel yourself get heated or frustrated, come up with a plan, thinking about how you can be really clear around what the coaching and mentoring session is about. Draw back on what Kate said, set those parameters, have those clearly agreed outcomes that you want to achieve in them to help. Another part is, of course, social skills. So in terms of emotional intelligence, it includes a range of things, but for the purposes of coaching and mentoring, it's the ability to communicate well with others, to be able to support and guide colleagues while holding them accountable. It's the ability to build bonds or rapport with others, and your ability to collaborate and cooperate with others as well. So for me, I think in terms of, I try really hard to make sure that I make time for others. Getting an understanding of someone's worldview or their worlds. So getting into the classroom, getting into those spaces with them so that you can get an understanding of what that is and what that looks like. Again, drawing on what Kate said, making sure that you celebrate and share those successes that you have or that they have. And talking straight to people when there are concerns. So ensuring that there's a focus on the issue and not the individual themselves. It's not about their character, but around what the issue is and how that might be impacting on their teaching. I absolutely love this visual. It's one of my favorite visuals, and I think it really explains the importance that empathy has in coaching and mentoring. In order to be an effective mentor, you have to be empathetic. This means not jumping into the quicksand with them when they start talking to you about an issue or something that they're working on. They don't need you to jump in with them. They need you to be able to empathetically listen and ask the right questions to support them in that space. Just aligned with that is apathy. So just because they're sharing a goal or something that they're working on, a challenge or whatever it is that they're working on or that they're thinking about and their journey, and you might think it's trivial or you might think that it is something that is easily solved or not a problem, doesn't mean that it's not real to them. So it's really important when you're thinking about how you're working with someone to meet them where they're at. Your experiences, your your time teaching may mean that things that you've learnt these skills over time, but remembering that the person in front of you is in a different space is really important. And if you are showing apathy, that person will not open up to you at all. So I think it's critical to be empathetic when we are coaching and mentoring others. So going back to arriving in my little green Mazda and people around me running away, this new learning made me stop and consider why people were running away when they saw me coming versus being happy or excited to share ideas and thinking with me. I realized that in order to make a difference and support growth and change, bringing people on a journey of discovery with me was critical. I needed to understand myself and I also needed to understand what mattered to them. I needed to understand their values, their beliefs, their goals and ideas, and then work with them in ways to support the enactment of them. I also didn't need to be the holder of all knowledge, and I can't tell you what a relief that is. So it meant me turning up to their places and being aware of how I was presenting, my own prejudices, my own judgments, my own current emotional state. So I was very mindful of the conversations I was having with them. And I learned that if I really wanted to be of service to that centre or to that provisionally certificated teacher, I had to focus on how to support their growth and development. And lastly, I started to learn that by implementing all of these things, not only was I actively trying to be of service to them, but the benefits that I was getting in my own learning was incredible and so rewarding for my own teaching and learning. But there's some things to think about in terms of what are those conditions that might derail coaching or mentoring? And there's 4 things that I think are really important to remember. The first one is the inability to maintain confidentiality. So again, if you go back to Kate's, what she shared initially around having those parameters, I think that's really important because if you're peer mentoring or you're coaching someone and you can't maintain that person's confidentiality, you can break that really quickly in a team. It can destroy all trust. Another really important aspect to consider is transparency versus a hidden agenda. Don't ever mistake or use mentoring and coaching as a way to get to your desired outcome. If there's a hidden agenda, if you're trying to fix somebody, be transparent around what the conversation is, what the agenda is, what the outcome that you're both hoping to achieve to achieve in that moment is. Not being fully present is another one that will absolutely derail coaching and mentoring. So this is a tricky one in all of our roles because we are busy people and we generally have a lot of things happening at the time. So when you're having informal mentoring conversations, absolutely, you can't ignore the children or the individuals around you. You need to be actively supervising. But when you are making scheduled time to sit with someone, really trying to do everything that you can to be able to be fully present for them is really critical. And then the last one is not keeping your commitments. And this is a really tricky one again, because there's often things that come up that mean that you're just not able to spend that time with that person or meet with that person or do the things that you promised with that person. So I think owning those and being honest about those and being really careful when you're setting agreed actions or times to meet around what you can and can't do, I think is really critical. A model of coaching, like Kate said, that I found really, really helpful over the last couple of years is a GROW model of coaching. It's a really simple model of coaching. And it's really useful for professional growth cycle meetings, or if you're just having meetings where you're talking about an individual and where they want to grow. It's 4 steps. It is not, they're not linear. You might be meeting with someone, they may already have a goal. They may already have a really good sense of current reality. Or they may already have started thinking about options. So it's thinking about when you're meeting with someone, where you are in that space with them. It could be that initially it is about goal setting and helping them to set their goals, and focusing on really good questions is really critical. So in most coaching models, the questions are the things that should always come first. It shouldn't be you throwing all your ideas on the table. If we really want someone to grow and develop in their own teaching, it's about asking good questions. And I agree again with Kate in terms of the importance of this. So it could be, what would you like to achieve? What would you like to focus on? How could you break this goal into manageable chunks? The second part is the reality. So thinking about really encouraging people to think about what is happening for them now, what the challenges have been, what they've tried, asking lots of questions to get them thinking about where they really are now. And sometimes people are in, such a spin that they may not know where that is until you start really helping them to think about the reality of where they're at. The third one is around options. So options is a really critical one. Thinking about encouraging people to about the steps they may take. I really encourage people to ask questions more than just a brief questions. So it could be something like, what might you do next? What else? What else? So the more you encourage people to think, the more they're able to kind of brainstorm and think about some wider ideas. And then the fourth one is thinking about a way forward. So this is kind of setting the actions, the goals or the steps that they'll take to achieve their goals, and within a time frame. This isn't to say when you're coaching that you never give your suggestions or ideas, but it is worth mentioning that it is more beneficial for that individual's growth if you start with lots of questions. If you're anything like me and get really excited by people when they start thinking and brainstorming and want to share your ideas to be really helpful, a strategy for me is I write. I spend a lot of time writing the conversation, and that's to stop me from just jumping all over their ideas or taking over other people's ideas. So your role as a coach, again, in terms of the GROW model, is to just really help that person that's sitting with you to set and articulate goals. So really helping them to think about what they'd like to achieve in that space. Your role in terms of thinking about reality is to give them time to tell their story, to get this really good picture of what's actually happening for them. It's really critical that you use active listening in this space, and especially if you're working with them and you know the reality and you see the reality in a different space, you want them to be able to tell it from their perspective, not just to be able to, or not just to talk over them. In terms of the options, it's thinking about really getting to them to think about the visioning, thinking the big picture stuff. So getting them to think about the ideal outcome that they'd like to achieve and exploring ways that it could be achieved. You'll find people when they are in this stage, if they're in a really great mindset, they'll come up with really great ideas. They'll be all over it. If they're people that are really feeling, if they're really struggling or they're feeling overwhelmed, what they'll do in this space is often think of all the barriers as to why they can't achieve it. So it's important to really get them to think about, if you could wave a magic wand, if you could have the best classroom that you could have, and try and get them out of that space. And then it's about the way forward. So converting that discussion into a decision and into actionable actions that they can take, figuring out what they need in that space, and how they might achieve it. And of course, it's all underpinned by active listening. So for this, it's really important to plan, prepare yourself. If you're distracted by the door being open, your phone on the desk, your jobs that you need to do, you won't be able to actively listen. So try really hard to take away those detractors and think about a way that you can manage this. As I said before, it's about being present, making sure that your mind is settled, that you're engaging in your emotional intelligence so that you can refocus, that you can breathe and be able to be there for that person. Coaching frameworks and micro credentials, as Kate said, are so invaluable for building these skills. There's nothing wrong with having a framework on the table and telling the person that that's what you're using in order to support them. And last but absolutely not least is respect. Really respecting the individual in front of you, as I said, taking them where they're at, and respecting what their beliefs and what they think in that space. So key learnings for me. Relationships underpin all in mentoring and coaching. Without it, you've got nothing. It's not going to happen. It's about letting go of control, being okay with asking lots of questions, not having all the answers. That's great. Peer mentoring and coaching versus being in a positional leadership role and mentoring and coaching is different. It is different when you're holding someone to accountability versus peer mentoring where you are they're not necessarily accountable to you. So it is a change, it is a difference, and it is about understanding that when you're in that space. It's absolutely an investment in time, but it's such a great investment in time. It's rewarding not only for you, but it is so rewarding for the person that you're mentoring. And ultimately, it's an investment in time, but you'll get that back as that teacher grows and develops. You'll have more and more time to do other things. Seek to understand, ask questions. Don't presume. You don't know necessarily their worldview or how they've got to that thinking. So really take time. Use a framework. I encourage you to have a look and see what there's out there. And there's a lot about GROW coaching out there. But there are other models as well. And then it's about listening, asking questions, and then offering your ideas. So I end on this this statement or question for you to think about. Can you be that person someone considers as having had a positive impact on their teaching and learning? Thank you.
Kia ora, Michela. Thank you so much. I have written down so many things that I wanted to raise that really sat with me from your presentation. The whole idea of understanding your whole self and also the whole self of the person that you are mentoring. But there's also that aspect about thinking about mentoring, about yourself being mentored, but then your work as a mentor as well, and how you were considering the relationship between the two. I also liked what you said about finding that balance between what it is that you think that you that needs developing in terms of pedagogical thinking and discussion, but also the individual that you're working with and what it is that they want. And my favorite thing to consider for leaders is that idea of making time for yourself, so that you have set parameters around ensuring that you've got the time and space to look after your well-being. And sometimes I think it's really important as well to ensure that we're having those conversations that we're that with the people that we're mentoring as well, when we recognize that perhaps that's something that they're not bringing into their work-life balance, particularly the PCTs that we might be working with. So kia ora, Michela, thank you so much. I'm so glad that Roseanne suggested that you would be a great fit for this presentation, because I really enjoyed listening to your story.